Welcome to Hashtag Trending the Weekend Edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. I can understand that many of you might get frustrated about politics. What we see for the most part is a lot of BS. Ask a politician a simple question, you get a lot of non-answers, talking points, ways their political opponents have it wrong. Yep, that's true, even in Canadian politics. So what can we do? We can get involved and try to change the process. I've certainly done that. I worked for every political party at one point. I've worked for the NDP, Neil Young, not the musician, unfortunately. He was a great guy, though. And Bob Rae. I've worked to support the Liberals under Stephane Dion, one of the most incredible people I've ever met. I've been a riding president for a progressive conservative riding, which led me to have the honor to meet Joe Clarke and to understand the authentic person he is. I know what you're thinking. What's wrong with this guy? Can he take a side? And the clear answer is no, I can't take sides. There's only one side, and that's what's best for Canadians. I've never been a believer in party labels. I wanted to work with authentic people who wanted to make Canada a better nation and make a better future for our children. And the need was never greater. Canada is in crisis. Our productivity numbers are plummeting. Regardless of what you get fed from government sources, we are not a leader in AI or in digital governance or anything else digital for that matter. But equally, the stuff that the opposition parties are feeding you, it's nonsense as well. The reality is, if you strip away the party lines, if you talk to the smartest people in Ottawa, you'd know the truth. We are in crisis. Our future standard of living is in real jeopardy, and yet we are an incredibly resilient people. We have so much going for us in multiculturalism, in diversity, in intelligence, and in many other areas that if we could just get it together, we could fulfill that quote of Wilfrid Laurier, "The 21st century belongs to Canada." So what do we do? Fortunately, we have a structure in our government where parties don't really have to matter. It's called the Senate. For my American listeners, you have a Senate as well. It's called the same thing as ours, a body of sober second thought. The difference in Canada is our senators are actually sober. I say that in jest, but in our Senate, and I'm not taking political sides, but credit where credit is due, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he would no longer make political appointments to the Canadian Senate. He would appoint knowledgeable people and challenge them to challenge the government's thinking. In other words, he would make the Senate truly a body of sober second thought, a place where nonpartisan citizens could join with only the best interest of the country at heart, a place where people who weren't politicians could offer their experience and their expertise to the government of our nation. And there's nobody that you will meet that embodies this more than my guest, Colin Deacon. Senator Deacon is a serial entrepreneur and someone who knows technology and knows how to build businesses that export to the world in a digital economy. And we are lucky to have him, both in the Senate and for this interview. I met Senator Deacon at the Digital Governance Council, another group of nonpartisan business and government leaders who also only have one objective: to help Canada become a leader in the digital economy. I was totally impressed by him, and I asked if he'd sit for an interview with us. I hope you'll be as inspired by it as I was. My guest today is Senator Colin Deacon. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you, Jim. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, the Senate, I grew up with the Senate, and it was a totally different place than it is today. How did you get into the Senate, and what's it like today?
I'm only in the Senate because the Prime Minister changed the appointments process in 2015 when he became Prime Minister. Instead of appointing people to the Senate that were going to adhere to the government's agenda, he appointed people to the Senate who were independent and in large measure nonpartisan. I was inspired by that because it didn't require constitutional change. It didn't require huge bureaucratic changes. He just changed how he appointed people. And so I decided I would apply because I thought the only way a startup entrepreneur is going to find themselves in the Senate or in Parliament is through the Senate and through that appointments process, because we're used to identifying a problem one day and getting to work on solving it the next and iterating on it the day after. And it's just a culture that doesn't fit with somebody running for Parliament and then having to adhere to a partisan doctrine and being whipped, whatever else. So for me, I thought, let's just at least have those who were part of the appointments process in the Privy Council office and through the independent appointments process aware of the fact a startup entrepreneur could bring something different to the legislative process. And I, for the life of me, never thought I would ever be appointed. And the reason is simply because when I got appointed and the Senate this past, had a lot of middle-aged white men. And that's not the diversity that Canada sees in our communities right across the country. And so I never thought I would get appointed, but at least they'd be aware of the arguments for having a startup entrepreneur. But I did get the call. And I, along with, I think, as far as I know, all the other 80 or so senators that the Prime Minister's appointed have been given one request by the Prime Minister when being appointed, and that's to challenge the government. And I would argue that's the first time in the history of the Senate in Canada where the Prime Minister has said that to someone that they're appointing to the role. It's normally support the government, adhere, help the government get its legislation through.
Absolutely.
So
and that is a tricky
that's
thing
why I'm there.
Politically. Yeah. Just one question I have to ask you. Did the call come from the Prime Minister himself?
Yes.
And I got called by the Prime Minister once in my life, and I thought it was one of my friends making a joke. And I almost blew this call. I almost went down totally in flames. And thank God at the last minute I went, no, this is real. What did that feel like?
I'd had some clues because I'd had a long interview to prior to learn a little bit more about me. And I'd had a long call with the Privy Council office and I've had to send it a lot of paperwork. And so I had some clues that maybe something was coming. And then I got a call saying, would you be available for an important call? It didn't say what, an hour, but I was pretty sure what it would be.
Yeah, I got the important call, but I didn't realize what it was going to be either.
And I still, to this day, can't believe that I was selected and have the responsibility that I have. And it's the hardest job I've ever done in my whole life. It's by a long shot.
I don't think people realize that. And I'm going to go to that point, but I want to just, because I've gotten past this. The audience may not know when you say you were a startup entrepreneur. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background before the Senate?
So I was a stockbroker before in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, and I wanted to learn how to build businesses. So I ended up spending a lot of time in early stage venture capital and angel investing, but building a business in the education technology space and also one in the dental technology space. Both were export-oriented businesses. The one in the education space was one of the 4 fastest growing companies in Atlantic Canada for 4 years running in the early 2000s. It was one of the top 4 fastest growing companies. And it went from not even having an area code on the business card because it didn't need it to having 99% of its business outside of Canada. And I love that challenge, but that's a younger man's challenge now as far as I'm concerned. It takes everything out of you. But entrepreneurs who start because they see a problem that needs to be solved. And they go, I have an idea to how to solve that problem that's going to create value for people. And so that's why I felt it was the sort of characteristic that should be looked for in Parliament.
Yeah, I think that's changed to somewhat, though. And that was disappointingly, I taught at Waterloo for a while in entrepreneurs, and everybody kept talking about their exit strategy. And I kept going back to them saying, no, an entrepreneur, you don't understand how much work's going to go into this, and you don't understand what the odds are. If you're not passionate about solving somebody's problem, you're going to find yourself lost.
Companies don't get sold, they get bought.
Yeah.
They get bought because they're creating a lot of value.
Yeah. And this journey took you into the Senate. So tell me what your first impression was as you got in there. You're a person who knows tech, and I've been openly critical about the fact that I don't think there are enough people in politics who understand technology. And I think that's scary for me. But you're a person who understands tech and understands the world of business. What was your first impression like in the first weeks?
My first week was purely overwhelmed by the process and the all the rules and the pomp. It was the last week of sitting, and so there's royal assent with the Governor General there, and lots of the traditions, the honor of being in center block. My first 6 months were in center block. The rancor of the debate is often called silly season, and I was appointed in the last week of June. And it gets silly, but there's a lot of debate that I don't think many Canadians would identify with, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just arguing. But when I came back in September and we started moving again, I spent the summer trying to understand what I was going to do in this job, because you don't have a clue till you get into it. You really do go in the deep end. When I came back in September, it was fantastic because I was appointed to what was then called Banking, Trade and Commerce Committee. And we were studying issues that I care a lot about. The systemic risks in the banking system 10 years after the financial crisis, which got us into studying open banking, cybersecurity risk, asking questions of then Governor of the Bank of Canada, and asking, why are we seeing such low productivity numbers? In a digitizing economy, we should be seeing improvements, and being told in September or October 2018, oh, it's coming. We're expected to see that in our forecast relatively soon. We're last week, I think.
Which we have not. Yeah,
we've not, and we now have the Bank of Canada saying it's time to break the glass. It's our low productivity levels are an emergency. Great, but these are all issues that I care an awful lot about. For me, it was a fast start, and so my first thought was, wow, I get to talk about issues that I care a whole lot about and ask questions of people that I never thought I'd be able to ask questions of. And so it became very relevant very quickly.
And I think a lot of people don't appreciate this. You talked about this, about how much work any politician puts in. I think no matter where you sit politically, you should have respect for the amount of work that people do. What does a senator do? What occupies your day?
So we have a different job than members of parliament. And I couldn't be a member of parliament, getting reelected last 2 elections for every 2 years. That whole process of they're responsible constituency work. We are not. We're really policy focused, legislation focused. And so we spend all of our time really understanding legislation and looking to who we should question on legislation to make sure that it is the best it can be, or studying an issue of importance. For example, our study of open banking, our recent study on business investment in the digital sector in the Banking Committee. So we get to do what I think is the most exciting side, from my perspective, of the role, which is how do we change our laws and regulations and policies and programs to be more citizen-centric and to really hear the voices that are not necessarily being heard through the more partisan process in the House of Commons. And that, for me, I am just so honored to have that opportunity. But when you consider all the other work that MPs have to do, I'm astonished by how tough that job is. Just astonished.
Yeah, me as well. So and I think this is something people may not appreciate. I don't know if it's true. I'm no longer politically involved in anything, but there was a time when I knew of a fair amount of politicians and knew people who were working. And the thing that always amazed me was they had the yelling and screaming during question period and the debates that you see. And then when they got down to work, it was much more collegial. Might not always be in an agreement, but people really worked together. Is that the same spirit that's in the Senate now?
The Senate's tremendous that way, in my mind. Yes, we have a question period that the opposition is always asking questions that are clipped and shared. I clip and share my questions, but we all have our different questions we want to ask. But the reality is, no, when we get into a debate, I'm really impressed, especially the more challenging the debate is, medical assistance in dying, issues around gun control. It is really wonderful to hear the different perspectives. And I think what gives me hope is that Canadians, if they were to listen in on the debates in the Senate, There'd be people they could identify with. There'd be arguments they could identify with, no matter where they come from in the country and what position they hold. And that's what I find most inspiring about where I work, is that I think we really do have folks in the Senate who represent that massive diversity of views in the country. And that's really important. The legislative processes do that.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the issues that face Canada right now. Let's start with the productivity issue. I thought we were doing better. What is the problem with productivity right now, from your point of view?
Our view was in the Senate Banking Committee that, yes, competition plays a role. Privacy plays a role. If you're not giving Canadians control over the data that they generate second by second, estimated to be 2 megabytes of data a second coming off of every Canadian on average through all of our different devices, be they watches and cell phones and iPads and cars and you name it. So there's all of that side of things. We've got to have our data rights in place, because if we don't give Canadians control over how their data is used, by whom, for how long, then they're not extracting the value in our economy from their data. And if we're not extracting the value from our greatest asset, which is one of the world's most diverse populations, most representative populations in healthcare and energy consumption and financial data, and other multinationals are getting the value out of that, then that's occurring elsewhere in the world. That value is not being created in Canada. So that's one element. Competition. We're just dominated by oligopolies. Oligopolies can increase prices without increasing value. So that means that they don't have to invest in innovation. They can keep doing things the way they were doing them and just charge a bit more. That's just not on if you want to have a more productive economy. Certainly those elements. IP protection. We're not good at it in Canada. We invest in our universities. We've got great research in our universities, but the IP that is generated is not protected for the benefit of Canadians and the Canadian economy. It tends to be licensed to multinationals. And if you total up the total licensed IP out of Canadian universities, and the annual revenue from that is equal to 1.3% of the annual research funding we put into those universities. So we're not getting the return on investment. So those are just some of the areas we identified in our report last June, and it's in the Banking Committee, and I'm really pleased because I think it's holding the test of time.
Do you think there'll be action on those recommendations? Because this is critical. We are a non-competitive economy, and you pointed that out. And I've been in the university sector, and I've seen how much IP is generated, how poorly it's marketed in some circumstances. In other cases, it's just given away. This is money that we invest. You look at Geoffrey Hinton, author of AI, University of Toronto. All of that IP was developed at the University of Toronto. And where is it now for us as Canadians?
At least Google said thanks.
You got to give them that. Thanks. We'll kill your publishing industry for you, but thanks. Yeah.
I'm actually hopeful, Jim. I'm hopeful because people are starting to talk about the issue. We're starting to get worried about it. There's been some tremendous improvements to our competition law, tremendous reforms to competition law in this country that will start to make our oligopolies have to push harder. We're following the United States, and the United States is getting it right. But in terms of mobilizing data for the benefit of Canadians, we're still struggling. C-27, the new privacy legislation and AI Act, still struggling its way through Parliament. It's a very slow process. I'm hoping that we'll see it in the Senate, perhaps early fall. And before this Parliament dissolves, we'll have updated privacy legislation that really reflects the realities of the world, because data and IP are everything in this new world that we're finding ourselves in. And that's where all the value is. So if you're not creating value out of your intellectual property and your data, your productivity numbers are going to be crappy, which they are.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic because the conversations are happening.
Good. The other thing that I find is that there's two levels of regulation or legislation that we just can't seem to master. One of them is it's fine to burden a bank with a whole pile of regulations, and maybe you should. They're responsible for billions of dollars. Those same regulations and legislation get translated down to the entrepreneurial sector. And so you've got somebody with two people in a company who's trying to start a company, and they're trying to keep up the same regulation and legislation as a bank is. I don't know how we can compete in a digital world like that.
I often say that the regulations that were designed to protect citizens from oligopolies abusing their dominance now protect oligopolies from innovative new entrants. And so that's just what you've described. And so we've got to become much more agile. The world is changing really rapidly, and our ability to change our regulations happens in decades in Canada.
Yeah.
But technologies and business models and business realities are changing literally in months and weeks. And so we've got to alter that approach. I've written about it in the Hill Times and speak about it a lot. I believe that an approach that has come out of the Digital Governance Council and CG is that we should be incorporating a lot more standards by reference and having a lot more digital sandboxes to have new entrants come in and understand how regulators to understand how regulations might need to change, might need to be adapted in order to have an innovative new entrant break into a market and deliver greater value to Canadians. So those two approaches are ones that I've been pushing along with some colleagues quite hard, because if we are going to continue regulating in decades, then we have no hope. Because the only companies that will be able to continue to function profitably are going to be the biggest companies with the biggest lobbyists and legal capacity to manage all of the regulatory burden.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Digital Governance Council. I'll post a link to their site in the show notes for this. This is a group of business people from various businesses and government who've gotten together.
All levels of government.
Really, all levels, yeah, and who are trying to make a real difference and have an articulate debate, and I hope provide our legislators with some real business input, or at least commercially viable input. I don't know how else to describe it, to solutions that we have and things that would help our economy. And I know Jim Balsilli's been a big player in that, and a lot of people spend a lot of time in it.
A lot of people from a lot of different types of organizations, different industries, different sizes. It's incredible from my standpoint, the extent to which that organization has brought together a diversity of perspectives in a way that gets a productive output.
Yeah, and they do take input. People can get involved with it, so I know we'll post that. Can I just go back to one of my favorite topics, which is purchasing, which is one of the things that I got started on. There's two, purchasing being one and the other, digital government being another. But purchasing in the government could be one of the greatest investment that governments could make. How they purchase, if they were purchasing from small businesses and entrepreneurs. But there's so many barriers to that. Is there any discussion about removing those?
Well, Michael Wernick last week in a post said that we should blow up our current procurement processes and take it out of its current department and start all over again. I couldn't agree more. The government procurement should be a driver of innovation in this country. We can't afford analog government. We have analog government at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels across the country. We're being passed by everybody. So we need digital procurement. I'd just like to see everything become X prizes effectively. Government define the problem, say, here's our constraints in solving it, and let's have a competition to see who's going to bring forward iterate the best solution. Because that would unlock all this innovative capacity across the country, rather than the solution having to be found in the brains of people who work in a minister's office or public service in Ottawa. Let's light up the country and get Canadians engaged in solving some of our biggest problems. The other thing is, let's get some GovTech sectors built up where you have Canadian innovators that are constantly introducing solutions that integrate into the delivery of a government service in an effective way. Or RegTech sector, anything where we've got the private sector helping to find a solution to a pervasive problem in this country is going to be a good thing in my mind. And especially if it comes from new innovators versus oligopoly.
Yeah. And I will say this honestly, I was a consultant. I did procurement purchasing, and that's what opened my eyes. procurement is totally broken. It is there to sell to the biggest companies or to buy from the biggest companies with supposedly the least risk. And there are even rules in there that keep you from asking intelligent questions. They actually have a fairness commissioner who tells you you can't surprise these people with anything.
And they define the solution they want to buy when they should be defining the problem they want to solve, because they don't know all the innovative solutions that are out there. There's no ability. So don't stop defining the solution. We got Phoenix because they wanted to buy a solution, had to manage 80,000 variables. What tech entrepreneur would ever take on a project that managed 80,000 variables? You'd start and you'd iterate up, but one project doing that, it's insane.
And the insanity of it, I did a big pension system at one time, and we had 85 different calculations. And when we actually worked them out, the differences were pennies.
Yeah.
Pennies in terms of these things. But they were written into contract because nobody could go back and say, look, we got smart mathematicians here. You can prove all you want. We could have 2 formulas. This thing would actually work and be done in no time. And we'll give you the extra couple pennies.
Yeah.
But nobody could do that.
Jim, a year or so ago, you did an article on the Dia app in Ukraine and how they've digitized government services while fighting a war with their legs tied and another arm tied behind the back, and they still got it done. But what they did that I think is most important is they put developers and policy people together to solve the problems, because the rules had to change to deliver a citizen-centric service. And so putting those two together, it's the only way to make it work. Government is trying to take their existing rule system and digitize that. But this existing rule system, as you just pointed out, for too many cases, makes no sense.
Yep. Yeah. And that's what opened my eyes in talking to those people, was they did it all right. They took smart entrepreneurs from all sectors. I didn't get any sense it was big, small, or whatever. They took the smartest people. They brought them together with government people who were dedicated to this citizen-centric idea, and they were prepared to change the rules.
Yeah.
And that's Canadian governments will not do that. We keep killing ourselves on that.
The only way we won the Second World War and became one of the largest fighting forces in the world was by breaking all the rules. The only, you have to. And right now we are driving our economy into the ground because our rules are too complicated everywhere you look, from housing at a municipal level and provincial level, to banking system, you name it. We are not allowing innovators and the people who are bringing new productivity into the economy to succeed. And so what happens? They go elsewhere. They leave the country, or the business leaves the country. I built 2 businesses. I never sold anything in Canada. It was too hard. I built the companies in Europe and the United States because it was, at least I could build a profitable enterprise.
We talked about open banking, and I'd love to do a whole show with you just on open banking and talk about that, because I don't think people realize there's a whole group of entrepreneurs, mostly in Vancouver for some reason, who are opening fintech businesses, and you will never see any of the products in Canada.
No.
They sell to every other country in the world.
We need to help. Our banks are solid and respected around the world, but they don't serve the entire population and every need of their customers. Their services are proven to be some of the most expensive in the world. Why are we not allowing innovators to come in? Not to increase prudential risk or the financial risk of the banking system, but to drive innovation into the financial system in terms of the services that citizens can access, and the way they can improve their credit score, the way they can access a less expensive loan or mortgage. To me, it's the foundation of our economy. We have to have innovation in our financial system or in our economy.
So if I could give you the magic wand for 5 minutes or whatever, what would you do? What were the 3 biggest things you'd do to make change in our government?
Well, one of them's already underway, which is significant competition reform in terms of the Competition Act and fighting the increasingly monopolistic economy that we've had, turning that around and starting to allow companies to compete more fairly. And that's a great thing. But there's huge barriers to competition within and across governments, municipally, provincially, and federally. We don't develop laws considering whether or not that law or that policy is pro-competitive, is enabling new entrants and innovators to break into the marketplace. So number one, I would give the Competition Bureau the resources and the power to do studies about the anti-competitive or pro-competitive elements of legislation or policies or regulations across government in different areas, to start to teach politicians and teach public servants about the importance of competition. The second thing I'd do is I would not allow another promotion in the public service without the individuals that are eligible for the promotion to have a digital first capacity in their thinking, some evidence of success in their thinking. If we don't start to drive it through promotion, it's never going to happen. And we have got a fully analog government across the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. And the efforts to change that are brutally tough. And the best way to do it is change from within. I would be moving in that direction. And the third is to make sure Canadians start to get control of their data, to make sure that our data and our intellectual property is something that we are controlling far more effectively for the benefit of Canada and the benefit of Canadians. And we don't have that right now. And when you've got a global economy that is increasingly, the wealth and the value and that is coming out of the economy is coming from a digital first intellectual property perspective, then we've got to make sure that Canadians are being protected in that regard, and they're not right now.
Yeah. And what would you say to those people? Because I think you and I would be in violent agreement on most of what we should do, but to those people who fear that if we step back from regulation, we're going to allow things to happen. I'm going to say something political. You don't have to react to it, but in Ontario, I want housing, but I don't want our green belt gone. So how do we protect ourselves without over-regulating?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is having an agile regulation system that allows those regulators across different areas of government to take ideas from those that they're being regulated. I'll give you an example. I was in a fish canning plant, and they got it's a highly automated plant. They got a continuous flow autoclave. Autoclave is used around the world, steam, to sterilize in hospitals, dental offices, you name it. But the CFIA rule said they had to use bleach, had to use chlorine. If they do that, they can't sell into Europe. Stop the command and control regulations that we have define out the ability to innovate. And so we've got to have rules that, in that case, it should have been a level of bacteria, a bacteria count they have to prove, right? Not how they get to that bacteria count. And that's right across government. We've got to start using something that's equivalent to those out-of-date regulations. And that's, to me, standards, codes of practice, certifications that say, yes, you are achieving what was intended through the regulation. Those get iterated. The number of people involved in creating standards in Canada across every sector on a weekly basis in this country is incredible. It doesn't need to be run by government, but ministers need to have the ability to say this, we're going to incorporate this standard as being equivalent to the regulation and have that constantly being iterated with expert advice being given to the minister from small, medium, and large companies and academics and others as to what they should be pointing to.
Yeah. And you pointed out quite clearly, one of the things that's frustrated me about government and politics, one of the reasons I made an exit from it myself, was all of the conversation is about the rules. And you broke the rule and you did this. And instead of talking about, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve?
Yeah. Are we making progress on the key performance indicator that we've decided is crucial here? No, we're not. Yeah. Okay, then what do we need to change? Let's break those rules and figure out how to start to make progress. And right now, we know what our economy is delivering to us. It's delivering to us some of the lowest productivity in the G7. Productivity growth. Productivity growth is what will give our grandchildren access to prosperity that we used to take for granted in this country. And I think some people still do.
Yeah, I think they do as well. And our concern for our children is something that, especially as I get older, is something I find to be totally gone in our society. Nobody's thinking next generation, and I don't know how you build a country without that thought.
Iroquois Confederacy, the law of the seventh generation. When you're making a rule, think 7 generations ahead. What's going to be the effect in their lives?
Yeah. So I don't want to leave my audience bummed out on this, but I think there are problems, and I think we need to solve them. For those of us who are in the tech sector, those of us who are passionate about this, what should we be doing? What can we be doing?
I think we've got to find a way, there's the points I made earlier, we've got to find a way to change procurement and prove that procurement can be done fundamentally differently. So let's find a minister with a big, hairy problem that has to be solved. Could be at a provincial level or federal level. And let's propose an X-Prize process that de-risks the solving of that problem by having the smartest minds competing with one another to find the best solution, and not have it Ottawa out, but Canada in. And to me, that's crucial. Ottawa should be running open source processes and making sure the process is fairly run, but they don't know how to do it. That's not what Ottawa does. Ottawa has had a black box mentality. Actually, let me be positive. There was a phenomenal process that has been run since 2018. There's been a phenomenal process run by Finance Canada in developing the rules and structures around open banking, or what is now called consumer-driven banking. It's fantastic. There's been 3 different phases to it, with a lot of reports and transparent processes. I mean, I've never seen a regulatory development process that published the minutes of the meetings online following the meetings, run by Abraham Tastian, the most recent one. That's been a very open process, and what I liked about it got everybody in the same room talking about the same problem, rather than a minister's office or public servants talking one-on-one to each group and then deciding how to balance those out. Get them in the same room, bang their heads together, make them figure it out. That's what my dad used to do with us as a bunch of rowdy kids. You figure it out. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. And so we have got a model that could be replicated. And if it was, I think the partisan divisions in Ottawa would be far less wide, because you would have Canadians being part of developing the legislation rather than 2 parties coming saying your side's wrong, my side's right.
Will you come back and discuss those with us?
If you think that I've got something worthwhile to offer, Jim, I'm always happy to chat with you. We need to be supporting people like you that are diving into these issues and helping Canadians to find a way to get engaged. And so I'm really grateful for all you do and happy to help whenever I can.
And we are grateful. There's a wonderful thing the Americans say, and they say a lot of silly things, but the wonderful thing they say is, thank you for your service. And I know the work that goes involved, and I know one takes on a role like this. Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. Listen, I love the responsibility. There's a lot of days I don't love the job, but I love the responsibility, and it's an honor. It's something most people don't know. There's only ever been about 1,000 senators in the history of this country. This is a really great honor, and especially to be independent in Ottawa, where, the party system and partisanship is strong right now. It's a huge honor. So,
well,
thank you.
Gives me hope. I hope there are many more like you. My guest today has been Senator Colin Deacon. Thank you very much for coming, sir.
Thanks, Jim.
That's our show for this weekend. Please let me know what you think. You can reach me at therealjimlove@gmail.com. It's exactly how it sounds. therealjimlove@gmail.com. And if you like this, why not share it with a friend? Thanks to all of you, our listenership rose by 50% last year. And the more listeners we have, the more clout I have to bring in guests like this. We're approaching 2 million downloads for this podcast, and I'd love it if you would help us build to that number. So thanks for all you've done. Thanks for listening. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with me. And I'll be back Monday morning with the Daily Tech News. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.